Now that I've introduced the imperfect active, middle, and passive forms, it's time to go over some rules concerning the augments. Now, we just introduced the most common and most frequently used augment for the imperfect tense or any other past time tense, and that's a smooth breathing mark epsilon. So this is the most common form of the augment to indicate past time. Usually, you put an epsilon in front of the stem that begins with a consonant. But there are times when the epsilon is not a suitable augment for the verb, especially if the verb does not begin with a consonant. It begins with something else. So if the word begins with a vowel, you actually won't see the epsilon being used. Rather, the augment is making the front vowel long. Oftentimes, the augment for a verb that begins with a vowel is signified by making the stem vowel long. So if a stem begins with an alpha, to make it long, it becomes eta. If it begins with epsilon, to make it long, it also becomes an eta. And if it begins with an omicron, to make it long, it becomes an omega. And here are some examples. Akuo, I am hearing. If I were to say I was hearing, rather what I do is I make that alpha long, and then I add my secondary active suffixes, on, s, e, am, and ata, on. In this case, I'll just add on to it, and this is I was hearing, where all the rules for the imperfect apply regularly here with this verb. The only difference is the augment is making the stem vowel that begins the stem long rather than using the epsilon. So for erkamai, which is I am going, I am coming, if I want to say I was going, I was coming, then I would make the epsilon long. There's my augment. And then add my connecting vowel. And then what are my secondary middle suffixes? It's main. So erkamain is I was going. I was coming. And homologeo, which means I confess, homologo, this is a word that's not in your vocabulary, but I'm just simply using this as here for an example. And if I were to augment this, I would make this an omega, hama, la. I have a contract vowel here, and it just so happens because that contract vowel has an unusual suffix ending, it's going to be un, and I'll explain that not for this module, but for next module. The important thing is to note that the augment is long omega, and homologun means I was confessing. So if the word begins with a diphthong, however, and not just a single vowel, the first vowel lengthens, and if the second vowel can subscript, do it. So for okedomeo, which means I build, you can see the word oikos, for example, in this verb form. But okedomeo means I build or I edify. The way I would augment this is the omicron becomes omega, and then this subscripts. So this is ok, ko, do, moon. And this means I was building. I was building. And the important thing here is don't worry about the different ending for the contract vowel that we're seeing. The important lesson here is how do I form the augment? If I have a diphthong and the second vowel could subscript, do it. Usually it has to be an iota. And what I did was I made the omicron long and the iota subscripts underneath it. What about eteo, which means I ask? Well, the alpha goes long here. That's eta. The iota subscripts. And then we have a tune, which is I was asking. I was asking. And then for oxano, because the upsilon cannot augment, we just have the alpha going long, then write the upsilon, oxanon, and this means I was increasing, I was growing. So I was building, I was asking, I was increasing, or I was growing. And the important thing to note here is not so much the suffix endings as we're trying to go over the rules of the augment, where if you have a diphthong, the first one goes long. If the second one's an iota, it subscripts. If it's not an iota, it does not subscript, and just keep the first vowel long. The last augment rule has to do with what we call compound verbs. And a compound verb in Greek is when you add a preposition to a verb, and together it forms a new word. And so for eis perumai, for example, you have the verb perumai, you have the preposition eis. And yes, this can be translated literally as I go into, but it can also be translated as I enter, and because this is a preposition, you cannot augment a preposition. This is where the main verb is. And so you would actually insert the augment between the preposition and the main verb. So this is still one word. It is a compound verb. But because the first part is made with a preposition, you have eis, you have to put in the augment here. This is where your augment is. So it's eis se por ru amen. I was entering, whereas eis perumai means I enter. Apaluo is a stronger word than luo, I lose. Apalu means to free. And here, the augment would be inserted here. And remember that if you have a preposition apa, and the word following it begins with a vowel, in this case, we're inserting an augment, then the form of the preposition is op. You add the augment, the omicron drops in front of the epsilon, and it's apaluon, which is I was freeing, apaluon, apaluon. And so the rule here is, if you have a compound verb, and you'll be learning some for this chapter's vocabulary, the augment is inserted between the preposition and the main verb of the stem. Do not augment the preposition. That would be incorrect. And here are some other examples. And with that includes the grammar, although we have one more verb paradigm to go to in the next slide. But this concludes the grammar for this module. A friendly reminder that for the vocabulary, even though we skipped the grammar lesson of chapter 20, you are responsible for all the verbs, all the vocabulary in chapter 20. So please memorize chapter 20 vocabulary for this module and chapter 21 vocabulary, which covers the imperfect indicative. And then for your homework, it's only chapter 21, but it's the modified version. So make sure you use the modified homework. And we have one more verb paradigm to show you. This is the imperfect form for εἰμι. So far, you've learned the present tense forms of εἰμι. You've also learned the future tense forms of εἰμι. Now you're learning the imperfect forms of εἰμι, which will be translated as I was, you were, he, she was, we were, you all were, and they were. So this is the imperfect form or past time form of εἰμι. And the stem is listed here as simply an epsilon. Here we also have secondary, the secondary active suffixes. And the augment is going to make the stem go long. So you're actually not going to see the epsilon, you're actually going to see eta all the way across the board. So this is the stem with the augment. And so eta plus main, so main is I was, ace is you were, ain is he, she, it was, and we actually have two forms for we were. You can say amen with an epsilon, different from a main, which has the eta there. Or you can use the form ametha, and you actually see both used in the New Testament. Both mean we were. There's also ate, which means you all were, and asan, which means they were. And these are the forms for the imperfect of εἰμι. Let's say it together one more time. Amen, ace, ain, amen or ametha, ate, asan. Let's say it one more time. Amen, ace, ain, amen or ametha, ate, asan. And that concludes our module.